We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Tesam and Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 99b. The Mishnah here continues to discuss a situation where you have two children that get mixed up. One of them is a Kohen and one of them is the slave of a Kohen, and you don't know which one is which. And so the Mishnah continues and says, Ve'enon mitamin lamesim. Both of them are not allowed to become tamei meis because each one might be a Kohen. Ve'enon nosin nashim. Also, they cannot get married to any women. Bein ksheros, bein psulos. They can't get married to women that are kosher to the kahuna because, again, this child might be a slave, and therefore he can't marry a kshera, and they can't marry someone who's disqualified from the kahuna, because again, the child might be a kohen, and so therefore he wouldn't be able to marry someone who's disqualified from the kahuna. Higdilu, now when these children become adults, so hataruvos, when these two children who get mixed up become adults, vishicharu zeh ez zeh, and then they can free one another. In other words, each one will free the other in case that child was actually the slave. So at that point now, nosin and nashim reuyos lakahuna. They now can get married to women that are fit for kahuna if the woman is not disqualified from a kohen. So again, each one is a suffix. He might be a kohen, but they've both been freed. Neither one of them is going to be an eved, and therefore again they can marry women that are reuyos lakahuna. Still, ve'enon mitamin lamesim. Still at this point, when they're adults and they're freed, they cannot become tamei meis because they might be a kohen. V'im nitmu, but if they do become tamei meis, einon sofkin harbayim, they do not receive lashes. They don't get the 40 lashes because again they might not be a kohen, and therefore it would not be a problem. Ve'enon ochlin b'truma, again they cannot eat truma because the individual might not be a kohen. V'machlu, but if they do eat the truma by mistake, so einon mishalmin karen v'chomish, they don't pay back the principal and the fifth like it would normally happen when a Yisrael eats truma by mistake. In this case, again, this individual might be a kohen, so he doesn't have that payment. Ve'enon cholken al hagoren, they also do not take portions at the granary. Rashi over here says ve'ein cholken al hagoren en nostim lem truma al hagoren sham meshuchor Yisrael, who again when they're giving out the truma at the granary, the one that was freed is a Yisrael, so he doesn't receive truma from the goren. Umochern asat truma, however, what they are allowed to do is they're allowed to sell the truma v'hadamim shelahen, and they can keep the money. Rashi over here says, "Umochnas truma trumas tevuasim kishemafrishin osa ein srichin lasita lakohen." Let's say they have truma from their own grain, so when they separate, they don't need to give it to a kohen. Dechol chad amar lakohen, I see raya delav kohen anna v'shakol, because every single one can say to whatever kohen is coming and saying that he wants the truma, this guy can say, "Well, bring a proof that I'm not a kohen, and if you can prove I'm not a kohen, then you can take it. But since you can't prove I'm not a kohen, so I can keep it." Now, nevertheless, obviously they cannot eat the truma because they might not be a kohen. Rather, what they do is they sell it to kohanim, and they're allowed to keep the money. And the Mishnah continues, Ve'enon cholken b'kodshei hamikdash. They also are not allowed to take portions from the kodshim of the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi over here says, Ve'en cholken b'kodshei hamikdash kagon oros kodshim. For example, the hides of the karbanos that generally go to the kohanim. Again, it's not clear which one of these individuals is a kohen, so they can't take that. Ve'en nosnim lahem kodshim. Also, we don't give them kodshim. Rashi over here says, Ve'en nosnim lahem kodshim lahakriv, meaning we don't give them karbanos that they can be makriv these karbanos. That again, they're not allowed to do because we don't know which one of them is a kohen. V'ein motziin shalohem yadeim, but we don't take away from them when they bring that. We don't take it away from them. Rashi over here explains, V'ein motziin shalohem miyadam im hayu chayav in chatos o asham o ola. Let's say they were chayav themselves to bring a chatos or an asham or an ola. Ein kofen osam lasitein le'anshe mishmor v'lios avodasam v'oram le'anshe mishmor. We don't force them to give it over to the kohanim who are on watch in the Beis Hamikdash, who are working in the Beis Hamikdash that week, and then again the hides will then go to that mishmor. The chol chad amar kohen, because each one is able to say that I myself am a kohen. V'tani, we learned in a brayso minayin lekohen shabo makriv karbonos of kol shosha yirtza. Halach is, let's say, how do we know that a kohen, anytime he wants, he can bring a carbon? V'afilu b'mishmor she'en shalo, even if it's not his mishmor. Talmud lomer uvam b'chol avas nafsho v'sheris. A kohen can come at any time and bring his carbon. Uminayin shavodosam v'oram shalo. And how do we know that the avoda is his to do and he can keep the hide? Talmud lomer avishas kadosh of lo yu, his own kodshim he's allowed to keep. V'taruvas halalo. So when it comes to these individuals who are mixed up and we don't know which one is a kohen, hoel v'echan mei and kohen, since one of them is a kohen, ein bezin yichon lahotzi miyadan bal karcham. The bezin can't come and take it away from him against his will. Ulasitam lanshe mishmor, and give it over to the people of the mishmor to take care of. Ela yakrivu karbanos, and rather they can bring their karbanos. V'yachzru lehen abasar or v'yitnum l'chol misha yirtzu, and the meat and the hide will go back to them and they can give it to whoever they want. O halalo yasu shliach kol kohen sheyirtzu. or they can designate any shliach they want to bring their carbon. They don't have to give it to the kohanim of that mishmor. Or they can delay their carbon until they want to give it to the anshe mishmor. They have all of those options in such a situation. And Rashi over here continues lashon acher, another explanation of the last two lines in the Mishnah V'ikr, and this is the main explanation. When it says we can't give them kachim, that's bevechor v'charamim kamar. It's referring to bechor and chayrim. Bechor is generally given to the kohen, and chayrim also is property that's given over to the kohanim. So that's not given over to these individuals because we don't know that they are kohanim. Ve'ein motzian es shalahem miyadim. But then it says we don't take it away from them. D'yamar I'm not kohen, because the guy can say maybe I am a kohen. So maybe the property, once he has such property, he can say it belongs to him. Ve'gabe charamim nami tznan. By chayrim also the Mishnah says hakohanim ein machrimin. The kohanim, they don't do chayrim, they don't donate that kind of property. Again, shacharamim shalahem, because it all belongs to them anyway. So that's the same basic idea. And Rashi continues, v'hador ori. According to this explanation, the Mishnah is then going to go on to say, my ka'avid b'v'chor shalo. So what should this guy do with his b'chor? Because again, he doesn't know that he's a kohen. He can't treat it like a normal b'chor. So what he does is yirachi yistoi, if he lets it graze until it develops a mum, v'lo yakrivenu tam. He shouldn't bring it as a carbon, as a regular carbon that's not blemished. Dimkein lo yochel es besaro, because if that's the case, he won't be allowed to eat from the meat. Shahamakriv yakvenu, because the one who's actually doing the hakrav and bringing it is going to hold him back from taking the meat. Whereas if he lets it graze until it develops a mum, he'll be able to do with it what he wants. Ulaloshon rishon kashli, Rashi says, according to the first explanation he gave, it's difficult. Ta'amrinan b'hagozel, because we say in hagozel dehecha de lo motzi avid avoda shliach nami lo motzi mishavi, that if he himself can't do the avoda again because he's not sure that he's a kohen, so he can't appoint the shliach. And in the first lashon, Rashi had said that he can't do it himself, so he'll appoint the shliach. And again, that's difficult with that Gemara in Bava Kama. And the Mishnah continues, Upturin min hazroa umin halachayayim umin akeva. Also, these individuals are patur from giving to the kohanim from their animals, the zroa, lachayayim, and keva. Those are some of the gifts that you have to give from your animal. We're talking about animals that are not kachim. You generally give those to the kohen, but since this individual might be a kohen, he doesn't have to give this to the kohen. Uvechoro yehiroa ad sheyistoyev. Again, like we said before, the bechor, he should allow his bechor to just graze until it develops a mum. And finally, the Mishnah concludes, in general, v'nosnan olav chumre kohanim v'chumre Yisraelim. And these individuals, since we don't know if he's a Kohen or a Yisrael, so we put upon him all the stringencies of the Kohanim and all of the stringencies of the Yisraelim. And Rashi over here says, Uvechoro yirachi yistoyev. Again, if he has a bechor, he lets it graze till it develops a mum. Afilu bizman habayis. This is talking about even during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. To halom motzi lemichfinu lemitan lekohanim lakrovi. Because number one, they can't force him to give it to the kohanim to bring it as a carbon v'lechol es besoro and to eat the meat. Vinu nami lo motzu lemeizvi lekohen ulahachzer lanabasar. And they can't give it to a kohen and then be returned the meat to bechor tam eino nechol elo lekohanim. Because the halach is, if you have a bechor that does not have a mum, that meat can only be eaten by the Kohanim. And again, this individual doesn't know whether he's a Kohen or not. That's what it says in Bechoros. Hilkach, therefore, the solution for this guy is Yirachi Yistoyev, let it graze until it develops a mum, Umutter l'shochto b'medina, then he can shechten anywhere, v'yochluhem, and then they could eat it themselves. The Bechor Bal Mum, because when you're talking about a Bechor with a blemish, Ein Bo Mishum Zorus, there's no problem over there if the meat is eaten by a Zar, by a non-Kohen, Ela Mishum Gezel Demanos Kuna. The only issue is that you might be stealing from what the Kohanim is rightfully theirs, but again, in this case, it's not an issue of stealing because he might be a Kohen. V'hacha Gezel Leka, here there's no issue of stealing. The Hamotzi Mechaver Olav Araya, because again, the other Kohanim would have to prove that he's not a Kohen in order to take it away from him. And the Gemara says, Mesu haksherim v'chulu. It said in the Mishnah that if the ksherim die, now the word ksherim there was referring to the individuals who had a certain lineage, who knew who their parents were. So the Gemara asks, Elahanach mishum diyarev lehu havelu psulin. What are you saying? The ones that got mixed up, they're considered disqualified? Would you use the word psulin just because they're not sure of their lineage? And so the Gemara says, yeah, you should change the language of the Mishnah. Rapapa says, Ema umesu havadoin. The better way to say it in the Mishnah would be, and the vadoin, the ones who were certain died, meaning the ones who were certain of their lineage. The ones who didn't know their lineage, they're not considered psulin. They just have a suffix exactly who they are. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Lifnei hakalo echad cholitz v'chulu was talking about the fact that you had sons of the daughter-in-law, and they knew they were the sons of the daughter-in-law, and they died. And so their widows, what they do is with the ones that are not certain, we don't know whether this guy is a brother of the husband that died, or again, is he actually a son of the mother-in-law? So we say one of them does chalitza, and then the other one can do yibum. And the Gemara says, Davka michlatz v'hadar yivume. You have to do the chalitza first, and then you do the yibum. Aval yibume b'rei shelo. You can't do yibum immediately without first doing chalitza, the kapaga b'yevam l'shuk, because again, if the person doing yibum is not actually the brother-in-law, and it was the other person who was doing chalitza that was the brother-in-law, so if he doesn't do the chalitza first, so then that's going to be a problem of yevam l'shuk. It's going to end up being that this yevama is marrying someone and not the brother-in-law that she's supposed to be marrying, so that's why again you do chalitza first, and therefore it won't be a problem of yevam l'shuk. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Kohenish and Asari v'chulu. Again, the case is you have two children. One is a Kohen and one is the slave of a Kohen, and they get mixed up. We don't know which one is which. So it said that when they go to the granary to get their truma, they can take one portion of the truma. And so the Gemara says, Chelak echad, they take one portion. Pshita, isn't it obvious that they take one portion of the truma? Tosas over here says, Chelak echad, Pshita, Perosh Pshita, She'ein Lahem, Ela Chelak echad. It's obvious that they should only get one portion. Only one of them is actually a Kohen. Now Rashi over here has a different girsa. Chelak echad salka daitach. Do you really think they get one portion? According to Rashi's understanding, the question is, Chelak echad mashma shel kol echad. That sounds like each one gets a portion. And again, the Gemara is asking basically the same as Tosas. Why should they each get a portion? Shouldn't it only be one portion? And so the Gemara answers, Ema chelak ke'echad. What the Mishnah actually means, it's not talking about how large the portion is. What it means is they only take a portion if they come together. And the Gemara explains, Tanan command Amar in cholkin truma le'eved el imkein rabo imo. Our Mishnah follows the opinion that says we don't distribute truma to an eved unless his master is together with him. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, in cholkin truma le'eved el imkein rabo imo divrei Rabbi Yehuda. The Brisa says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we do not distribute truma to an eved unless his master is with him. Rabbi Yossi says, Yochel sheyomar, he can say as follows, Im Kohen ani tenuli, if I'm a Kohen, give it to me b'shvil atzmi because I'm a Kohen. V'im eved Kohen ani, if I'm the slave of a Kohen, tenuli b'shvil Rebbe, so then you should give it because it's my master's portion, and I'll take it as his eved. In other words, Rabbi Yossi says that the eved Kohen can come on his own and receive the truma. And the Gemara explains what the machlokes is based on. B'mekomo shel Rabbi Yehuda, in the place of Rabbi Yehuda, in his locale, hayumalin mitruma liyuchsin. They used to say that if somebody came to collect truma, that showed that he was actually a Kohen, and they would use that as evidence of his yichus. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we would never allow an eved to come on his own, because if we allowed that, it would turn out that we would turn avodim of Kohanim into actual Kohanim, which would be a problem. B'mekomo shel Rabbi Yossi, but in the locale of Rabbi Yossi, lo hayumalin mitruma liyuchsin. They wouldn't take someone who just received truma and say, oh, that proves that he has yichus, that proves that he is a Kohen. They wouldn't do that, so there was no problem for an Eved Kohen to come on his own and pick up the truma. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, so Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says, Miyomai lo he'adati ela edus echad. In all of my days, I only testified one time about something. Vehelu eved lakun alpi. And because of my testimony, they actually turned an eved into a Kohen. In other words, they took that testimony in the wrong direction, so to speak, and they made an eved into a Kohen. The Gemara says, 1 second, is that even possible? Helu salka daitach. Do you really think that because of the testimony of Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, they actually took an eved and turned him into a Kohen? Is that even possible? Hashta behemton shel tzadikim en HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi takol al yadan. Now we know that even the animals of tzadikim, since they belong to tzadikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't allow a stumbling block to develop because of these animals. So tzadikim atzman lo kol shekein, don't you think tzadikim, certainly a stumbling block is not going to happen because of them? How could it be that Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok would cause something like this to happen, that an Eved would be considered a Kohen by the Bezdin? And so the Gemara says, you're right, Ela ema bikshu lahalos Eved lekun alpi. What he really meant to say was they almost made an Eved into a Kohen because of my testimony. It didn't actually happen. And the idea over here is Chaza bi'asri de Rabbi Yossi. What happened was, he saw the Eved of a Kohen taking truma in the locale of Rabbi Yossi, v'yazal v'asri bi'asri de Rabbi Yehuda, and then he went ahead and he testified about it in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda. So since he testified about that in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda, they were ready to turn this individual into a Kohen, but really he wasn't a Kohen. Really he had taken the truma in the locale of Rabbi Yossi, where even Avodim would take the truma, and therefore it's no proof at all that he was a Kohen. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Asara in Cholkin Lehem Truma Bebeis Hagranos. There are 10 Kohanim that we would not distribute Truma to them in the granary. Ve'eluhein, and they are as follows: Cheresh Shota V'Katan, a deaf mute, an imbecile or a minor. Tumtum V'Androgonus. Again, a tumtum is somebody that we cannot tell whether he's male or female, and androgynous has signs of both, a male and a female. V'Ha'eved, and a slave. V'Isha, and a woman. V'Oirel, and an uncircumcised man. V'Atame, and one who is Tameh. V'Nosa Isha She'ena Hogenes Lo, one who marries a woman that's not fit to marry a Kohen. V'chulon mishagrin lahem levateim. Now all of these people, we would send to them the truma to their houses. Chutz mitame v'nosa isha she'ena hogenes lo, except for a tameh, and also somebody who marries a woman who's not fit for the kahuna. And Rashi over here explains, Zasare and Cholkin Kulu Mefarish Taima, all of them the reason will be explained. Va'isha Eshes Kohen, that's talking about the wife of a Kohen, we don't distribute to her. V'ha'arel Kohen Shemesu Achiv Mach Masmila, that means a Kohen whose brothers died when they had bris milah, so he wasn't given a bris milah because it's dangerous. She'ena Hoganis, let's say he marries a woman that's not fit, meaning Psula L'Kahuna, she's disqualified from the Kahuna. Meshagrin Lehen Levatein, and in all these cases we would send them Truma, V'ochlin, and they can eat the Truma. V'arel Sha'asr Lechol Machil L'Noshav Yavadav. Now an Arel who's actually not allowed to eat Truma, but he at least can give it to his wife, and he can give it to his servants, he can give it to his wives and servants. Chutz mitame l'kame mefarish, except for one who is tame, that's going to be explained. And the Gemara continues, B'shalom chereshota v'katan, I understand why we don't give it to a chereshota v'katan. Lav b'nei deyaninu, they're not considered to have das. Rashi over here says, Delav b'nei deyaninu v'zilusa de truma, l'chalik len begoren le'in kol. It's actually a zilzul, it's like a disgrace to the truma to distribute it to them at the granary in public in front of everybody. Tumtum v'androgenes nami, when it comes to tumtum and androgenes also, we understand. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Amud Aleph.